Right, a very common issue that's cropping up time and time again is this grub screw issue in the extruder. So I thought I'd just do a quick video ripping the extruder apart and showing you what the issue is and how to resolve it. I find the easiest way to check the motor is to just take the extruder off. It's only the 3 bolts, so I'm going to take the entire extruder off and strip it down as well, split it apart. So first thing you need to do is unload your filament, obviously, and remove the Bowden tube. These 3 screws hold the extruder on and hold the motor on. Make sure you're powered off before you start disconnecting any motors, otherwise it can damage the motherboard. So I'm going to take these, undo these 3 screws. When you do the last one, make sure to hold the motor, otherwise it's just going to fall down and crash through your bed. So that's the motor off. Just going to pull the wire. I have powered off. And then the extruder is free. So we'll take those 3 screws out. I've just set up the camera with another Wii table and dismantle the extruder, show you the issue. Right, so the problem that happens is these gears, this one on the motor, if that wee grub screw's a tiny bit loose, which I'm going to loosen that now and show you. If it's a tiny bit loose, the gear can move up and down, obviously, which is not a good idea. But as the filament feeds and retracts, it can rotate a tiny bit. You can see the shaft's not moving, but the gear is, as the grub screw hits one side or the other of this flat part. As that gets looser, that movement gets worse, until eventually it can go completely past the flat. At that point it can turn that much before the shaft actually starts turning the gear. That's how much it rotates. So obviously that's going to completely screw up the retractions. When it gets even further, obviously then it reaches the point where it no longer extrudes and the motor just spins without turning the grub screw at all. So you need to get that little tiny grub screw perfectly in line with that flat part of the shaft and then tighten it up. You don't want the grub screw right down on the motor, you need a small gap. If you see where the flat bit ends, if you just go to about there and then tighten the grub screw. You have to be careful with these grub screws because, for one thing, these supplied Allen wrenches. Not the best quality, and the grub screws are not a lot better, so it's very easy to round these things. So make sure it's tight, but don't go too mad or you'll round it. If you have some nail varnish or thread lock, blue thread lock, take the grub screw out completely and just put a tiny dab on the threads of the grub screw and screw it back in. Then when you tighten it, it won't ever come loose again. So that's the motor one. That's the easy one to deal with. The one that's inside the extruder is, from what I'm gathering, more commonly loose. You can do this one without taking the extruder apart, but I'm going to take the extruder apart. I'm not sure whether the camera's going to pick this up. Let me see if I can get it closer and in focus. I don't know if you can see right at the top of the shaft near the bearing there's a flat bit, and it's the same situation. The grub screw in there that's facing straight up now has to be in line with that flat bit of the shaft and fully tightened. But I'm going to split this one apart and show you a bit easier. So we'll slide the bottom off there, and then the entire gear will slide out. Hopefully you can see the flat on the top of the shaft there. Again, that grub screw has to be in line with that flat bit of the shaft and fully tightened. I'm not going to loosen this one, but to be honest, mine isn't even lined up properly. I can see it's at a slight angle, so I'm gonna mess with it. Right, so that looks a bit better. So that's the grub screws tightened. While you're in here, you can check these bearings to make sure that they're running free. Sometimes these bearings will get gritty, and you can buy these bearings and replace them. There's another one in here. I don't know if I can get it out. It's kind of pressed in. If that bearing inside is all loose and baggy, then the chances are that the extruder needs replacing. But if you hold the inner race and you turn the outer one, you can feel if they're nice and smooth, or if there's any grittiness there. If there's any grittiness in the bearing, then you really need to replace the bearings or get another extruder. This one is actually just starting to go by the feels of it. There's a little bit of play in it, so I'm going to have to replace that before very long. So let's see if I can press that back into place. So that's the extruder. It's a very simple piece of equipment. There's a lot of the parts in themselves are actually quite simple. There's very little to go wrong with these things. This gear on here doesn't have a flat on it, so that one there's never any problem. With the one on the gate, that one's fine. So that's the grub screws. I always find getting this adjuster screws really awkward to get it started. I don't know why. Right, so that's it put back together. When it's all fitted together, when you rotate this gear, it should be a nice, there's resistance there, but it should be a nice smooth movement, no noise, no rattling, no slack in it or play, and that's about it. Just reassembly is obviously the reverse of disassembly. Just pop the motor up, sit the thing on top, put the 3 screws back in and tighten it up. So that's the extruder grub screws. Personally, it's a common enough issue that I would check those on a new Vyper. I would check those from the get-go. Consider it part of the assembly process to check those grub screws are tight, because if they're not, it's just going to lead to problems down the line, and you're going to get quite annoyed that all of a sudden your 20-hour print's starting to get holes and gaps in it because that grub screws come loose. So I would consider tightening those as part of the setup procedure when you buy a new printer. Right, thanks for watching. Bye bye.